Hi, I'm Brian. Welcome to Autogefühl and welcome to a very wet, windy and unpleasant Dusseldorf. We've come here today to give a drive test to the latest in the engine lineup for the Skoda Kamiq. This is the 1.5 litre TSI petrol with 150 horsepower. But is it any good? Let's take a closer look and find out. Skoda have really been trying to modernise their range right across the line, and I think nowhere does that show up better than in what you meet when you look at the Kamiq the first time head on. Look at this, these are the daytime running lights. These feel very modern, sculptural and stylish, and for a small crossover SUV they express really a huge amount of personality. Now, unusually for a car in this price bracket, this car comes standard with full LEDs, which is a really nice touch, and it certainly helps the designers make the aesthetic feel uniform throughout. So you've got nice LED daytime running lights here that come right across into this grille. I think there's enough of a visual presence to give you that crossover SUV feel without overblowing it too much. There's a lot of nice angularity here, but it doesn't detract from the smooth roundness that comes up into the bonnet through the Skoda logo. The effect overall is to say a little bit more rugged, a little bit more crossover than the standard Skoda you might be expecting. But don't worry, it's still fun, it's still small, it's still nippy. Does that feeling continue round at the side? Let's take a closer look. 4 meters 24 in length, or 167 inches. This car is built on the MQB A0 platform, and what's really interesting about that is it's exactly the same platform as the Seat Ibiza, the Skoda Scala, that's the smaller one of these, and the Volkswagen Polo. But you get the same length that you get with a Golf. So, is that geometry going to result in any compromise when it comes to the drive? Well, we'll come on to that a bit later, but before we do, let's talk about this styling. What you get with this crossover is an extra 4 centimeters in ground clearance from the Scala on which the platform is based. Now, if you go with the sport suspension, you're going to cost yourself 1 centimeter. So really, you're talking about that much additional ground clearance. So that's not a huge amount, but don't forget this car only comes as a front wheel drive. So it really isn't designed as an off-roader first and foremost. Think of it more in terms of giving you extra ground clearance and the opportunity to take it maybe across fields if you're going to a music festival. For that kind of thing, it's absolutely perfect. As Connie comes around and shows you a little detail on this wheel here, I can tell you that the wheels are available in 16 to 18 inches. Here what you're looking at is the middle of the range, 17. For my taste, for this size and style of car, this is a really good choice. I think it's often tempting, especially when the designers push it, to go with the biggest wheel available. But on the smaller car, honestly, I think that can look a little bit silly. So the 17 is a perfect compromise for me. Now, talking of designers and styling, look at the way the side comes across here. Visually, I think it's a very big challenge to make a car that's small but more upright look intentional. Over the years, the design of smaller vehicles has gotten more and more expressive, more and more sporty, and all of a sudden the designers were told, get rid of that thinking. Now what we want to do is have it slightly bigger, slightly more rugged looking. So that represents quite a bit of a challenge. Here, the way they've approached that is by adding various horizontal elements to the design. You can see they all look very intentional. This shoulder line as it runs through the back is nicely paired with the roof line at the top. And here, because we have a panoramic roof, we have black, nice contrasting roof rails that go with the roof. If I get Connie just to take a couple of steps backwards so he can show you the way that these two lines converge at the rear, it really creates lots of nice visual levels to look at. That's especially effective down here in the lower third of the doors, where the line cuts right from the front wheel arch and right through to the back. So not only do you have all these contrasting horizontal lines to look at, but you have a lot of nice mixture of angularity and round softness to the design as well. All of that comes together to give you really quite a visually arresting side aesthetic to this car. It's interesting to look at. It does look a little bit rugged, but not too much so, and it still doesn't look too overblown. So I think Skoda have done a really nice job of bringing that unique styling through into the side. But obviously, the most challenging aspect of any car is usually at the rear. So let's take a look and find out how they've done there. Well, I think a not bad is what I would give this car. For me, possibly it's the size of this vehicle, possibly it's the appalling weather that we're experiencing today, but the color that you go with this vehicle makes a huge difference, probably because of the size. Now, with this darker sky and more drawn in grays that we have, this green really pops out. When we were offered our choice of the lineup to drive today, we both instantly agreed that green was the color to go with. It really does a nice job of bringing out these details in the rear lights. Interestingly, if you look at the car in a different color, you have a very different visual effect from the rear of this car. This serves to highlight this angularity and this swoop, and I think that's really nice. So there's not a huge amount happening back here to set your world on fire, but you have to give them credit for equally not having done something too bold, too different, too striking. I think it's pleasant and it's nice. I really can't encourage you enough. Have a look at the full lineup of colors and see what works for you. Interestingly, I would really like to know what you think about how the different colors work for different weather. Certainly for my taste, for the weather right now, green's the one to go for. Let's take a look and see what's powering this thing. What you are looking at is the latest in the engine lineup, and this is a 1.5 litre TSI petrol engine. It's producing 150 horsepower. It's also a 4-cylinder. If that sounds a bit too much to you, if you want a slightly milder petrol, then you can get one of the available 3-cylinder petrols. They come in either 95 or 115 horsepower. There's also a 1.6 litre TDI, on addition to which there is also a 90 horsepower CNG G-Tech. Once you've decided which engine you want to go with, you only have to decide which gearbox you want to pair it with. Now, if you're looking for manual, that's available right across the board. On the mildest petrol, the 95 horsepower, that's a 5-speed. The rest of them throughout the lineup are 6-speed manuals. If you go with the CNG, it has to come with a manual. Everything else can come with a DSG. The choice is up to you. So the outside's quirky and funky. Let's take a look inside and see if it matches. Well, this is a fairly standard Skoda type key. Here we have keyless entry. So if you put your hand on the outside of the door handle, it locks. On the inside, it unlocks. And a very well-known Skoda feature, the moment we open the door, these trims are to stop you hurting somebody else's car or your own. I really like the way these are put together. It's not a new idea now, but it really is a good one. So if it isn't broken, don't fix it. I wish all cars came with these. I think they work really well. If you get the Kamiq, you can get it in one of 3 different trim levels. There is Active, Ambition and Style. What we have here today is Ambition. That's the mid-level trim. But irrespective of what you go for, the styling itself is going to look very similar. And I have to say, given that this is a lower level SUV crossover, I'm really impressed not only with the choice of material here, but also the styling. It really looks not only unique, but really nicely finished. Soft touch materials on the top, nicely paired with fabric insets into the door. Just makes you feel that little bit more of a quality finished product. And when you look across at the door handle itself, look at the finishing here. It's just a nice piece of attention to detail that makes you feel like you're in a slightly higher class of vehicle than the one you're actually in. So I'm really impressed right from the moment you open the door on this car with quite how much there is going on here. Now, it's a small detail, but one I always enjoy looking at, and that is the pocket on the door. Is it big enough to actually take a serious bit of bottle? Well, that's 750 milliliters, so it's not only designed for small things, and there is plenty of extra space here for whatever else you have to cram into your door. Once we actually look at the car itself, well, the first and most noticeable thing is going to be these seats. Connie, I think might be easiest if you come round. That's perfect, and have a look. These are special sports seats. So aesthetically, they're a lot more impressive within the car than the standard seats. They should offer more support and a little bit more comfort, but they are larger than the standard seats, so the two payoffs for that: firstly, that does reduce your space in the rear slightly, and secondly, it means they won't fully fold flat if you have to fit that longer item into the back. But we'll take a look in a bit more detail at that later on. Most important of all, let's take a seat in the car and find out if they're actually comfortable to sit in. Well, regular viewers will know I'm 5'10" in height, or 178 centimeters, but I have very short legs and a very long torso. So when you look at my height, you can compare me to around about 6'1". And as you can see, even with the I do apologize, even with the panoramic roof, it's so cold, that's the problem, which usually takes at least half an inch off the available height. I have massive amounts of headroom here, so I am very comfortable indeed. Now, this seat is fully adjustable in all kinds of different ways. I like to sit low and deep within the vehicle, so this seat is as low as it goes, but it is quite forwards towards the front, again because of my short legs. So the driving position here, as I have the seat set up, is a dominant one. I'm deep within the car. That gives me a very low center of gravity, really makes me feel like I'm surrounded by this car. But because we have the higher up platform, I have a very good road presence and visibility. So on to the visual aesthetic of the car itself. There is an awful lot to like here. There is a lot of design, but it's all been carried out in a very discreet way, so none of it bothers you. It just pleases you when you notice it. Look at this, for example. How can you not be pleased by that? The amount of design happening here with the different levels mean that it's very visually interesting to look at. It's going to make you smile every time you get into your car. But, and this is the really important feature, it's all been done in a very conservative way so that none of it arrests your attention from where it should be, which of course is on the road. Now, we have a special steering wheel here. A few of you might know this certainly helps to give the car a slightly more sporty feel. It's got the regular inset driver's controls in it. Again, there's a nice attention to detail without anything being overblown. So nothing to distract, but plenty to feel good about the longer you own this car. Well, of course, all of this doesn't really start coming together until you switch the car on. And for that, I think Connie's going to need to find a slightly different position. As the relentless march into the digital world continues unabated, the argument between form and function is as alive and well as it's ever been. So, don't panic. If you are still very happily committed to the analog world, you can get the entrance level of this car's display with analog dials. That is still an option. But I don't think that that's necessarily something you're going to want to do. The digital cockpit has really been refined and worked out on this car now. It is now really ready for prime time. So what you're looking at is a 10.25 inch driver's digital cockpit display. You can change all kinds of different settings on there to give you different options to look at. Let me just scroll through a few so you can see. We can change it over to navigation, which is going to allow us to have that right in the middle, and you can change the way the dials look and interact as well. So there's an awful lot to do there in order to get things just the way you like it. Look at that, one click and we can go full screen on the display. So lots of adaptability. I think at first there was a little bit of an issue managing to make digital displays work quite as well as they can, but they're really coming of age now. Look at this for a nice way of combining physical detail with digital. I should mention, if you can see any flickering on the screen, that is the camera, not the display itself. It's always worth pointing that out. That is, of course, because of the frame rate versus the refresh rate on the display. Have a look at this. I wonder if Connie can pick this up. There are all of these subtle lines actually in the housing for the display, and those are mirrored digitally within the display itself. It really gives you a feeling of continuity between the architecture of the physical design and the digital virtual space of the car. I think that's a really nice touch. As we pan slightly further over to the digital infotainment display here, what you're looking at here is the top of the range, and that is a 9.2 inch fully digital display. Now again, that comes in lots of different sizes and shapes and formats, so if you're interested in something maybe with physical buttons a little smaller, you can get a slightly larger than 6 inch entrance level model that may make you feel like you still are able to push some buttons. That said, every single new generation of these systems, the interaction gets that much better, cleaner and faster, and a lot of that has to do with the speed of the processor. So you can see, it's not going to do it for me at the moment, but you can also use gestures to control some of the features within the menu system. But if I give you a feeling immediately, you can get a sense that there's plenty of responsiveness built into this system. It's really pretty easy and straightforward to use. As I said, if you're nervous about this because you've had bad experiences of using some of the first or second generation systems, that's really over with. You don't have to be distressed about it. It all works really well. But there is something that we are still very much working on as customers, and that's our ability to be able to get these things to do the thing we want when we want them to do it. So back to form versus function, take a look at this. Now, if we go down slightly below, we can see these really nicely finished off knurled air vents here. Great, really nice mix of old and new there, and a very stylish looking heating and cooling setup. But can you spot the obvious challenge? Well, we've got a couple of nice analog dials here. They are for controlling the temperature, but not the airspeed. If you want that, you have to push this button here. What that does, if we can bring the camera up, Cornelius wasn't expecting this, I can tell you, is give you the option here for changing the fan speed. Now, although I can see that this visually looks great, practically speaking, when you jump in the car, do you really want to be dealing with this? I don't think so. So I would rather sacrifice a little bit of that clean aesthetic styling and just please give me back the button. That's really what we want, I think. But once you get used to it, I'm sure it isn't a significant drama. So I think it's worth mentioning, but actually I'm sure it's fine. We do have heated seats in this car, and I can tell you, given how cold it is outside, these work extremely well. Connie, would you agree?
Yeah.
So we're both really quite happy now. Lower down and we have an inductive charging pad, and that's really significant in this car because Apple CarPlay and Android Auto should both be able to work wirelessly. Finally, we're getting that technology, which is great because of course it means you get in the car, slam in the phone and forget about it. And a nice touch here that I really enjoy is that this pad here is removable. You can see the QR charging pad underneath it. Why is that significant? It's significant because as phones get larger, and this is styled around the larger Samsungs or Apples, so it will take a larger phone, you're going to be able to get a different mat so you'll still be able to put your phone in. That's really smart thinking. I wish more of the manufacturers did things like that. But don't panic. If you want to charge your devices, there's 2 USB-C charge points back here, and that means you're more or less covered for anything you could need to do while you're in the front of the car. Look slightly further back, we have the DSG gearbox with our engine. More on that later when we do the drive test. Down here, the drive modes. Obviously, that's most impacted by the sports pack if you have it, because it changes the stiffness of the handling. Automatic on and off. Park assist if you have it. A fairly standard setup on 2 blanks here. You're going to want those blanks as blanks, because this, much to my surprise, is still a mechanical handbrake. Well, surprised as I am to still see these in new release cars, at least it means we can still drift. Well, this is not the largest platform in the world, so I have to admit I wasn't expecting particularly huge things from the back, so I'm very pleasantly surprised. Now, although I have very short legs, I can promise you that Connie doesn't. Connie, what's your height?
1.90.
190. So this seat is set for him to comfortably sit in the front. And you can see, even though I do have these tiny hobbit legs, I still have more than ample room here. So if you are a taller person, you're actually going to be really pleasantly surprised by quite how much space there is in the back of this thing. And not only that, but there's also a lot of nice styling details to make you feel like you haven't been forgotten. The finishing of these seats, for example, is really a nice touch. Oftentimes you'll get into the rear of a car and feel, well, it just isn't delivering me an awful lot of the quality that I got in the front. But I can tell you that back here it feels just as nice as it does up front. Anchor points for 2 car seats, and look at this, there's even a top tether point for a car seat if you fit one in the front as well. So lots of versatility if you've got small children. Heating and cooling controls back here, and if you want to access the rear, it's a standard 60-40 split on the seats. As you can see, we don't quite manage to achieve a complete fold flat here, but you can more than easily access the back while you are sitting in it. And that, on a day like today, can be extremely useful. So the front's spacious and roomy, there's lots of area available in the back. Does that mean that the boot's where they took the space from? Well, bizarrely, no. What you're looking at here is 400 litres of load space. As you can see, for a really quite small crossover SUV, that is absolutely great. Connie's got his bag back here, and there's plenty of room. Now this floor is actually to give you a level load surface, but there's actually even bags of room underneath here. And we're not even all done once we've got this up. There's even yet more room underneath there to take space of a full, well, actually I think that is a full-size spare tyre and a toolkit as well. So for a small car, there's absolutely bags of room. If that's not enough for you, you may remember me mentioning when I was in the back that the rear seats have a 60-40 split. And if you fold them flat, that gives you 1,400 litres of load space. So more than enough room. Now I'm going to come around the other side just to show you. As you may also remember me mentioning, if you go with these sports seats, you can't actually fold them completely flat. So if you need to load something in regularly that goes right the full length of the car, that might be worth thinking about. They do fold, just not completely flat. And as you can see, it's not an entirely flat load bay, but I would always go with passenger comfort in a car of this profile over complete usability. It's not an estate, but for a small crossover SUV, the amount of practicality that's been put into this design really is pretty impressive. Here, just for contrast, you can see that we put the shelf down to the lower load level, so obviously this gives you more in the way of load space, but you do lose out on that level lip. And as you can see, if you want to load through comfortably, it's better to have the shelf, and it's better to have it at the higher height. It It doesn't matter what you say to some people about how far the technology's come on, what's changed. They will never ever be prepared to accept that a 3-cylinder car can deliver exactly what they want from it. So enter the 4-cylinder 1.5 litre petrol version of the Skoda Kamiq. Well, first things first. Of course, it doesn't really matter quite what you do to a 3-cylinder, it's still going to sound like a 3-cylinder. One of the most pleasing things right from the start about this car is, of course, it sounds and feels exactly as you would want. But of course, it's not just about the noise that it makes. And there is the noise that it makes. You also get significantly more power from it. What does that mean? Well, if you want to go 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in the smaller petrol version of this car, you're going to be needing 10 seconds to do it. In this one, only 8.4. And I'm not going to lie, you really do feel that difference when you drive it. The engine feels solid, assured, comfortable, confident, and really at any speed that I'm going, if I give the car a little bit more oomph, then I get what I want from it. Now, this car has the sports setup on it, which means I have a slightly lower suspension, and I can change the stiffness of the ride to make it feel more sporty as well. How do I achieve that? Well, I have a mode selection button directly underneath the gear stick. But before we try that out, let's talk about the overall driving experience for the car. First things first, happy to be able to report that the seat is every bit as comfortable as it looks. Now, I'm not the smallest person in the world. Yeah, I know, I could probably do with eating a few less pies, but it's always good for me to be able to test the car seats, not least because my body geometry is so very different to Thomas's. So whenever we both sit in a seat and say that we have a very comfortable experience of it, that's usually a very strong recommendation. I just need to put my demister on for a while, so there might be just a little bit of noise while I defog the screen. So he's obviously a lot taller than I am, he's also a lot thinner than I am, and we both find this seat very comfortable indeed, so that speaks well to it. Whether you think that's worth spreading out the little extra on it, I don't know. The standard seats are actually very comfortable for this car. Now, driving position and road position, excellent. You do have quite a big B-pillar. My only concern with these sport seats is whether in conjunction with that, if your body geometry puts this seat at just the wrong position, you are going to have a very large blind spot. But this car comes with blind spot detection, and I always recommend that for any car you're looking at buying today. It makes a huge difference to your safety, especially if, unfortunately for you, you have just the wrong combination. Now, more powerful engine means that you do have a more assured feel while you're driving, but that can only really be delivered to you well if the gearbox combination is good. I have to tell you, modern automatic gearboxes are so good that I really have to be pushed quite a lot in order to justify going, let me turn that off again, with a manual over an automatic. This car is no different. I have to say the combination of the DSG with the engine hits all the right notes for me. Now, saying that, if you do put it in a sportier mode, and I can show you that right now, the moment I'm driving in standard, if I put it in sport, you can immediately hear very quietly a difference in the engine note, and if I put my foot down, then you get the full effect. Now, I would say that that's my first area of marginal disgruntlement with this car. What do I mean? Well, you heard the noise that it makes. It sounds like something very exciting is going to happen. Of course it isn't. It's a 1.5 litre petrol engine. You're not going to take off like a rocket ship. You are going to get a little bit of extra burst of energy, but enough to justify this noise? I don't know, leaves me feeling a little bit cold. And as for the change in the handling, well, it makes you feel a bit more sporty, but enough more sporty again to justify it. Honestly, I think in this car with this profile, I'm going to go with the more comfortable drive. And so far, every single time I've put this car into sport, I've driven with it that way for a couple of minutes, and then hit the mode selector and right back to normal. So that is a taste thing. Please give it a try and tell me what you think. But I don't know if those are features that this car needs. I have more than enough pickup and go in this car, driving it in standard mode and without that aggressive extra handling on the stiffness that I feel when I'm driving. Now, that aside, day-to-day use, you can see I'm in very unpleasant weather and I'm in really rather boring traffic, which means I can't make the most of getting some excitement into those turns. It's a very comfortable, assured ride. You have to be impressed with how well this car delivers on interior noise. As you can hear, I'm really not having to struggle to be heard whatsoever. And as long as I don't put it in sports mode so I can hear that big whiny engine, then I don't have any problem at all. That stays true once you get it out on the highway as well. Now we're just coming into a little bit of a built-up area. I think that is where this car is absolutely at its happiest. It's so nippy. What's so pleasing about this size of crossover vehicle is you don't suffer from the small car feeling that the platform traditionally delivers to you. You're higher up, but you do get all of the benefit, and that means nipping in and out and really enjoying the experience of whipping your way through town. But, and this is a big but, when you take this car out onto the open road and you start putting some miles onto it, you really are pleasantly surprised by how much comfort there is here. The seats are great, the car feels solid on the road, it really feels like it has a bit of substance to it, which given how light it is really very impressive. Brakes are really just as crisp and sharp as you would want them to be, and the gearbox is fantastic. So with all of that into the mix, do I really need that bigger engine? I don't know, but I think you're going to have to try it and let me know what you think. Meanwhile, Cornelius, what do you think as a passenger? Is it comfortable?
Yes. I like the seats.
It has heated seats. That's why. That's why he's so excited about it. I can't disagree with him there. What I will say is that in keeping with my experience from when I took a look at the aesthetic, I really like the way that all of these materials, as interesting and stylish as the finish is, nothing distracts you from the drive at all. The layout is great. The balance between the amount of information you receive and the way it's presented is just right. So you can set the controls up to give you exactly what you want, but none of it is too much. I don't really think it makes the biggest difference in the world if you don't go with the largest infotainment system. I don't think I could necessarily justify spending that money, but I would recommend that you go with a digital cockpit. I think it delivers an awful lot of extra value to this car. Well, because the weather is so bad today, the traffic's a little bit extra backed up, so I'm going to cheat a little and give myself a rolling start. I'm watching the traffic very carefully. I just want to show you what the full acceleration the car can deliver when you put your foot down actually feels like. So at the moment we are going from 20 kilometers per hour. I'm in the normal driving mode and I'm going to put my foot flat down. Now, I have to say you do get a little bit of pleasing front wheel spin, which in common with a front wheel drive car, cars nowadays are so very light, and if the engine's got just a little bit of muscle to it, it doesn't take a lot to get those wheels spinning. And in a world where everything is controlled electronically, it actually feels quite pleasing to have that effect. Of course, at no point do you feel that the car is not completely within your control, and it behaves really nicely indeed. So plenty of zip. Not going to blow your mind off, but actually it's really pleasant and fun to drive. The other thing that's surprising about this car is how well it handles once you start taking it out round windy roads. Now, that of course is where that sport suspension starts paying off. But how much of your time as an owner of a Kamiq you're likely to be spending driving hard and fast round country roads in order to justify having that sport suspension? Well, I think the only person who can really answer that question would be you. For a proper, fair comparison of just what a difference those driving modes and that change in stiffness makes, we've come outside of town a little bit to find some slightly more windy roads. So at the moment I'm in standard driving mode, so no changes there at all. And what you can see right off the bat, I'm not driving crazily fast, of course, we're on regular public roads, but given that we are higher up in the vehicle, there's really very little in the way of additional body roll from the standard car at all. I really appreciate that. It makes driving feel not only very safe and secure, but also really fun. The ideal driving experience around any country driving road really is in a sports car. So to maximize as much pleasure as you can the higher up you get, you need quite a dynamic drive, quite a lively, responsive feel in order for it not to feel too much like a bus. Well, I can tell you the Kamiq is the perfect apex point of a small crossover vehicle combined with the fun that you get from a smaller car. It's stacks of fun to drive, and you really don't need to be going very fast in order to have that enjoyment. What's important is when you do start going faster and you come across some unexpected challenges, it's still nimble enough, light enough and responsive enough to be able to handle it quickly and safely. That makes a big difference. Well, okay, that's standard driving mode. Let's see what changes when I change the modes up. So, now I'm in sport. There's the engine noise. I just feel that's overkill, but maybe that's me. Maybe I'm just slightly overly sensitive. Tell me what you think. Well, we've got a nice junction coming up here, so I'm gonna take a turn and I'm really gonna put my foot down and see what happens. Let's find out how responsive the car is. Those wet leaves are making it all kinds of fun. Yeah, I'm gonna stand by my original assessment on that. What do you think, Cornelius? Little bit too much bluster, not enough delivering, but you know, it's still fun. Well, and here we are, instantly stuck behind another car, and immediately then my first impulse is, let's put it back in standard. You really do get a lot of what you might be missing from the smaller engine when you drive the 1.5 litre petrol. It's fun, it's peppy, it's crisp, gives you what you felt like you were missing. I guess where I find it slightly disappointing is just that when I use those extra and additional modes, I don't feel like I'm getting sufficiently enough extra to justify the effort. Show you what I mean. If I bring this back to a stop and I go back to normal mode. Now, you'll be familiar with driving modes in cars. Standardly, if you put your foot flat down, they'll give you everything they have regardless. I'm not likely to be wanting to do any more than that in day-to-day life, and I like the way that the engine sounds to me in that mode, as if it's doing what I expect it to do. It's a very light car, it's front-wheel drive, so I still have that little wheel spin on the kick-out if I really give it some beans, but there's enough there to make me more than happy. I don't really need the extra. We've been driving around really quite conservatively today, obviously partly because of the weather, but also because of the traffic. And we've managed to achieve a fuel efficiency number of 8.6 litres for every 100 kilometres driven. Now that compares more than favourably with the 6 to 8 litres promised for the smaller petrol engine. So, okay, it might be less efficient to run, but it's certainly reasonably within the same ballpark, and I wouldn't use that as a reason not to go with this larger engine. This car clearly wasn't designed primarily for off-road use, but as you'll find out when the police instruct you that you're no longer okay to continue down the road that you thought you were going down and send you across what appears to be a field, it's nice to know that you do have that extra capacity. I have to say, I am experiencing feeling a little bit smug looking at some of the smaller cars struggling with some of these really quite large puddles. And if you think, yeah, but come on, that's just all for show, well, you can actually get extra under-eye protection for this car. So if you're thinking, look, Two-wheel drive's pretty good, especially with the right tyres. I think that will serve my off-road needs, but I do need to take it on roads like this fairly regularly. Well, that just might be a good investment for you. Well, that about does it from us from a very unpleasant Dusseldorf under quite challenging filming conditions. So big thumbs up to Connie for all of his endurance today. What do we think about the Skoda Kamiq? Well, first off, we need to have a brief word about pricing. The entrance level price on this car is around about 18,000 euro. This car starts from 26,000 euro, and if you have it set up with all the bells and whistles that we have today, then you're looking at closer to 38,000 euro. Well, that tells you a lot about the smaller car pricing market. The entrance pricing looks very good, but once you start adding spec, bells and whistles, the price very quickly runs away from you. So it's well worthwhile asking yourself before you start speccing one up, do I really need to have that? Which brings me on to this engine. Well, it's great, and I really like driving it. I must stress that. But I have to ask, do I need it? Does this deliver me enough extra that I can justify not only the extra expense in purchasing, but also I have to pay more in tax, and then I have to pay more for fuel, it's less efficient? Well, I have to tell you, given that this is a small crossover, my choice of the lineup as it currently stands would be the mid-size petrol. Yes, it's not as peppy. Yes, you've got 1.5 more seconds on its 0 to 100 acceleration. But most cars adapt to the way you drive over time and vice versa. And you can have an awful lot of fun out of that mid-size engine. Now, I would completely recommend that you try both. And if you try the mid-size and you say, look, it's just not for me, then by all means, go for this one. It's a really great drive and it's a lot of fun. I'm just not completely convinced it delivers enough extra to really meet my expectation. Now, that said, if they make a sports version of this car, I'm going to be all about that. But for now, I would suggest the mid-size is the one to go for. And personally, I wouldn't get the sports suspension. Why? Well, it's kind of like the engine. It's great. It definitely enhances your fun of driving this car, but does it represent sufficiently good value for money that you should spring for it? Well, if I had to sum up this car and say what it does for me most of all, it puts back all of the fun that I got the first time I drove the Yeti. I was really disappointed when that came off the market. I thought it was cracking. And the number one reason why is it was so much fun to drive. This car is too. But you know what, when you're burbling along in a 3-cylinder, you're not having great expectations about what the car can really deliver, and because of that, it's very easy to make you happy. Once you start upping the size and putting things like sports suspension on, well, then you enter a whole new area of expectation. And the car does deliver, but can it justify that increase in price tag? Well, that ultimately is going to be up to you. Please tell us below. If you have any questions, pop them there as well. Please subscribe. Thank you very much for watching, and we hope we'll see you again soon.